Now, even though the team was working outside of the office, they still had their work server there, and it was still housing the majority of their progress, when the mall's power got completely shut down. If you take a look back at the year 2015, you may be reminded of some major titles that came out, like The Witcher 3, Bloodborne, and Metal Gear Solid 5. On the indie side, we had the release of Undertale, Rocket League, and Ori and the Blind Forest, just to name a few. But there was also a major event that happened that year that opened the gates for developers in China who previously had little to no way to make console games and reach the outside market. Now fast forward, and we now have Chinese developers breaking into the mainstream, making waves and paving the way for the future of gamers and developers in that market, who dream of seeing their game played internationally. And that's where we're going to start today, as we're going to explore the story of development studio Pixpil and their journey as one of the developers leading at the forefront of new video games coming out of China to change the landscape of gaming with their first title, Eastward. To begin this story, I first need to take you back to the year 2000, Y2K. A major year in gaming, of course, and many of us in the United States and other countries can remember the massive launch of the PS2 in March, but over in China, they wouldn't see the PS2 till much later. That's because in June of 2000, in China, the Ministry of Commerce issued a ban on console and arcade machines. In particular, the import, production, and sale of these machines. So games like SOCOM, Hitman, God of War, and even GTA were off limits for gamers in China. This ban came about from the growing concern and fear of video games leading to both addiction and outside violence. This resulted in millions of gamers having to go without engaging in their favorite hobby and passion, at least for the most part. You see, the ban didn't restrict them from playing PC games, and thus places like internet cafes grew immensely and became the go-to place for players to engage in major PC titles and hang out with friends. In 2004, they will be allowed to purchase and play PS2 games, with restrictions. For example, gamers wouldn't be allowed to play games with lots of violence and blood, or ones that depicted China in a negative way, as the government was pretty sensitive and protective when it came to conserving the public image of their country. Though there was a console ban during this time, that only included consoles made outside of China, which led to domestic manufacturers creating their own consoles, which were direct copycats of the gaming console giants. These were both underpowered and underwhelming in more ways than one. I mean, let's take a look at some of the names of these consoles. We have the Nintendo V, and then we have the Winner. You probably already have an idea of the quality you could expect, as these were cloned variations of both the Wii and PS3, with a heavy focus on the Wii's motion controls. Their console games consisted of clones and rip-offs of other established franchises, like Mario and Zelda. For these reasons, not only PC, but mobile games took shape as the norm, and for aspiring developers in China, they really didn't enjoy the limited access, reach, and resources which came with developing on the mobile platform. For many developers, growing up playing the classics on SNES and PlayStation is what drew them to their career in gaming. There was still the option to develop on PC though, as there was a growing and consistent gaming scene, and with annual game jams and conventions going on each year, the gaming community was lively and ongoing. This ban in China wouldn't last forever. As I mentioned, 2015 was a great year in gaming, as China would fully lift its ban on outside console gaming. This allowed those who previously worked exclusively on mobile games to branch out and try their hand at creating great games in a broader international market. And this is where our story transitions. As you can imagine, the lifting of the console ban got many developers excited to have more options. But for Tomo Zhu, a hobbyist game maker at the time, he would have far greater ambitions that involve the future of how Chinese games are viewed and accessed across the world. Tomo had been creating a variety of mobile games, but had the desire to create a full-fledged console game and to fulfill his dream of breaking into the gaming industry. He soon came to know and befriend Hong Moran, who had just decided to leave his previous position as a pixel artist for mobile games at a local company. After a few conversations, Tomo managed to persuade Hong to join him to make games together, as he admired the work that Hong had done previously, not to mention his artistic talent and eye for detail. Their initial attempts at game design together resulted in some pretty underwhelming mobile games, as they were still used to creating gaming apps. But they soon regrouped to pursue something bigger. It was at this time that Fang Yi would join the team with additional experience in game design, and thus they formed the studio Pixpil. This time around, the team combined their experience and talents to start working on a game they would truly enjoy. The planning for their game started in a small apartment that they shared and worked from in Shanghai. Together, they used their savings to fund their new endeavor, and during the initial planning phase, they explored many possibilities, including making a puzzle-based game, but they soon ended up agreeing on doing a story-rich action JRPG. In the words of Zhu, "Before we started the current project, we decided to start from the best idea we had. The artist Hong made a pixel art RPG game mockup a couple of years ago. The art was so great that we always had the intention to make it into a real game. That was an easy decision." A key element in the game's mockup was the use of an urban decay aesthetic, which featured lots of detail in the environment, things like rust and overall aging of the landscape. Hong had many additional sketches saved of creatures and an environment for the game that was very similar to a former Chinese military outpost, known as the Kowloon Walled City. This monumental squared-off wall of tall, urban outlook buildings were located in Hong Kong, but got demolished in 1994. When you take one look at this, in addition to the urban decay aesthetic, you can clearly see the vision the team had. Speaking of inspiration, like many 90s kids, the team at Pixpil held the likes of Zelda in high regards, especially when it came to fighting in caves and dungeons, not to mention the epic boss fights. Their main inspiration, however, will come from the Earthbound or Mother game series, which had great animation and storytelling that helped build a bond between the characters and player. And speaking of animation, they knew that the best way to truly make the game stand out was to ensure that the animation was a major priority, which of course helps characters shine through alongside the storytelling. They named a few animated films that were a go-to point for inspiration, which included, of course, Studio Ghibli. I mean, you can't really talk about film and animation without first mentioning them. But there was also the likes of Macross, Cowboy Bebop, and Akira. When commenting on these inspiring works, Hong said, "All of these franchises have their own strong, unique aesthetics, and are trying to build deep emotional connections with the audience." Now, the story of the naming of the game isn't quite as deep, as Tomo was the one that came up with the name years ago. He explains, "The codename Eastward is from some naive idea of mine from a long time ago. The idea was about traveling along the railroad in some post-apocalyptic world eastward. We thought the idea was very interesting and picked it as a start point." Outside of finding inspiration in animation, the team made sure their small office was filled with resources in the form of photography books. A couple that stood out the most was Thomas Jorian's Silencio and Jordi Miao's Abandoned Japan, which both had a heavy focus on abandoned and even wrecked buildings and environments. As the project went along, they found new meanings in the name, such as life, the spring, and revival of the world, which can also be themes found in the game. This game may have an inspired visual look that normally has a feel of doom and gloom, but the artist Hong made certain that the team focused on making the game environment look lived in, full of life, and full of lively and unique characters, so that the player can feel fully immersed, especially during emotional moments in the game. These characters would not only be lively, but also plentiful, as the final game ended up having over 200 characters. The decision to have dual protagonists again came from the Mother games, but in the early stages of the game, the second character was just a tag-along AI. Soon after though, the idea of them having a kind of father-child relationship came from, well, both Tomo and Fang being fathers themselves, with Hong planning to start a family himself. And so they wanted to be able to craft emotional moments, subtle and large, that they could connect to. Tomo explained the use of their custom game engine that they created in-house. Eastward is built with our in-house game engine called G. It has a Unity-like environment for asset management and scene designing. It's built on top of an open source engine called Moai. Other than that, we mainly use Sprite for animations and Photoshop for designing. We also made some tools to automate asset workflows, so the artists could focus more on their creations. For the world they were creating, they took influence from Asian cities like Hong Kong and Shanghai, as well as the Showa and Taisho period of Japanese towns, as well as their architectures. One major visual detail that they focused on was the lighting effects in the game. The game itself seems to be a mix of 2D and 3D, but is actually made fully 3D with a 2D perspective. In addition, they use shader textures and lighting systems within their custom engine. The Pixpil team commented on their unique visual approach. Each pixel and bespoke lighting detail was handcrafted and took a lot of time to create. But we think our players appreciate the small things. And man, did they ever get appreciation and attention online. And if you're a gamer on Twitter, one thing you know is how vast the community of artists are and how many screenshots developers post of their titles. Well, with Eastward, they had no trouble getting attention to their title in the crowd of games online, and this had a lot to do with the work that Hong did with his unique aesthetic. The game would be tweeted and retweeted about, as well as shared on Tumblr, building lots of hype years before the release. In February of 2016, the immense attention that they received online also led to the intention of an outside investment party that helped them to expand both with the game and with the team. This was definitely a major milestone for the then 3-man team, especially since they had tried unsuccessfully to appeal to the Chinese government for funding, because the government had certain preferences that Pixpil didn't quite fit in with. They used their social networking service to spread the word of their hiring, but they also had a friend who let them use their domestic gaming media outlet to attract more talents. As they started receiving applications and resumes, the team worked on relocating their studio away from the apartment and into an office space to accommodate the new team members. They managed to find a larger space above a Shanghai shopping mall where they weren't as crammed as they were previously, but there definitely wasn't anything visually appealing about it. In fact, it was pretty bare bones and minimal. Just desks, chairs, and computers with space to put whatever you could fit on your desk. The team received almost more resumes than they could handle, but they were able to carefully select their future partners. I use the word partners as that is exactly what Tomo wanted all members to be known as, no matter how large their studio grew. Tomo explained, "We are expecting new partners to actively give their own input to the project. That's why I kept saying looking for partners rather than hiring." When it came to them bringing in new partners, the team were specifically looking for animators who had experience in the animation film industry, as they were very familiar with crafting relatable expressions, which was a key feature they were going for. In addition, there was definitely a need for more experience on the game development side, as the game grew further and expanded in scope. This included adding a more prominent role for the character Sam, so that she can stand out more. They gave her abilities and a role of her own, including being able to be controlled, separate from the character John. This created some technical challenges along the way, but the team stuck to it because it increased the fun factor overall. Outside of the main gameplay elements like battling and puzzle solving, Pixpil took a page from Zelda Breath of the Wild by including an ingredient-based meal cooking mechanic with the goal of not only providing additional health items in the game, but also to help provide a way to take a break within the game with something charming and rewarding. Another inspiring break time mechanic can be found in the game within the game called Earthborn, which was created with the additional team help and featured a surprisingly deep standalone game with music composed by Fang. This was definitely a very welcome surprise, as this isn't just some half-done minigame, but an in-game title that even has a digital manual that you can get from the Pixpil team, which really shows their passion and dedication to creating an engaging world. The team grew over the years of development and will get to about 10 partners, including 4 artists, 2 narrative designers, and 4 level designers and programmers. The team at Pixpil believed the audio to be just as important as the visuals, and after searching locally for composers, they decided to outsource the work to Hyperduck Studios and composer Joel Corlitz, who did the majority of the soundtracks in the game. Hyperduck is known for their work on some well-known small and large-scale projects, games like Battlefield 1 and Dust and Elysian Tale. Joel is an amazing artist that they first discovered when they came across a Kickstarter trailer for a game that he had worked on that unfortunately didn't meet its funding goals. Joel's work includes the likes of Unfinished Swan, Death Stranding, and Halo Infinite. Yeah, the journey of Eastward's development really does show how well they were able to attract the attention of fans as well as future partners. And to add to the growing list, they crossed paths with British video game publisher Chucklefish, who offered to partner with them after they saw not only the stunning visual allure of the game, but also the creative and tactical side of the game, and of course after getting to meet the team and see their passion. They would also create a publishing partner domestically with XD Network. Things were moving pretty well and on schedule until, well, you guessed it, 2020 happened. So up until this point, the team was still working from their office when they were forced to leave for security measures, as the mall that they were working on top of had to close, along with any and all offices. So the team had to go remote, which was a definite twist, which naturally brought about challenges, but they expected things to change pretty quickly. And boy did they. Now, even though the team was working outside of the office, they still had their work server there, and it was still housing the majority of their progress, when the mall's power got completely shut down. Artwork, concepts, sprites, and animation assets, code, all lost, and they had no way of re-entering their office due to restrictions. This obviously created some massive frustrations for the team, as they sought ways to retrieve the work and merge their files to create new builds, but to no avail, and so they needed to recreate their assets and entire sections of the game. There was a benefit that came from recreating what was lost, and that came in the form of better artwork, as they were able to revisit and reimagine what was previously created. Later, on August 11th, 2020, Pixpil, after working day and night, were able to make their release date announcement trailer for September 16th, 2021, giving them a little over a year to finish recreating their work and finishing up on the bosses and final chapters, in addition to ironing out bugs for the release on Switch. They will finally see their game released on time to the public, both domestically and internationally. Physically, however, the game would release in China first for the Switch, but Pixpil and Chucklefish are currently working together with IM8bit for Western physical release. With the release of Eastward and its accompanying popularity and success internationally, the team at Pixpil has made a definite statement in the gaming industry and has further paved the way for other aspiring Chinese developers who dream of making games they love as a living. And thanks to success stories like this coming out of China, the gaming community will continue to have a changed perspective with regards to the potential of Chinese-made video games.